Live. Welcome to BioFutures in Conversation on this International Women's Day. We've got a wonderful trio of ladies lined up. We're going to start off with someone that I've come across because she has worked with a number of my collaborators and peers. I've admired what she's been doing from afar, and I have wanted to have a conversation with her for a long time. So welcome to Thora. How are you?
Hi, good, and thank you for having me.
My pleasure. And I think you're in the UK at the moment. Is that correct?
Yes, north of the UK, Newcastle.
Up in Newcastle. Now, some of the people that will see the recording and that will join us live will know a bit about your background, but many of them won't. So I wanted to start at the beginning. Thora, what were the first inklings that you might pursue the career that you've gone on to build?
It's been a long time in the making, I will say. There's been a lot of different influencing factors. I would say how I kind of got into this and how I got into this field and the kind of line of work I'm doing was really a transformational experience I had many, many years ago. I went and did an internship at a place called Earthship Biotecture,
Yes.
which is in Taos, New Mexico. And for people that don't know, this is a place that is completely off the grid. Buildings that basically sustain their inhabitants with their own electricity, food, water, heating and cooling. And well, I'll caveat it with my background, of course, is in architecture. So I was an architecture student, very interested in sustainability. And we got to live in one of these earthships while we were also helping to build them. And there was this incredible feeling of it wasn't just architecture and a sterile building built with concrete or bricks. It was really a kind of living, evolving, responsive ecosystem that you were a part of. So you had to be very mindful of the energy usage that you were taking from the building, the water. If you're flushing the toilet, if you're washing your hands, taking a shower, you had to be really in tune with the environment and the circumstances of being in that building. And I think in that space, I really started to think about how we work with nature, how we interact with it, and how incredibly important it is to our everyday life. And we don't really see it, and we don't see necessarily the impact on how many time we flush a toilet or turn on the sink or we charge our phones. That you don't really think about it. It's just an omnipresent. It's always there. And I think living in those and building those really made me reconsider this relationship that we have. And I will say it's been a progressively going down the wormhole to working with microorganisms and mainly bacteria, which is what I do now. But it's always about this idea of how can we be more in sync with natural systems and the things that we have around us. So, yeah.
I love that. So it started off essentially in the desert environment, a very arid environment. And I know I spent 2 months out, well, a whole month doing basically field trips in a desert in 2024, and the better part of a second month off in Western US as well. And you really connect deeply with nature there, don't you? Because for a start, you've got a lot of critters.
Oh,
You've
yeah.
got rattlesnakes, black widows,
Tarantulas.
scorpions.
Yeah.
Yeah, the whole shebang. So you've got to be very wary. And although you're respectful, you know that these things can harm you, and if they do, you're quite a long way, aren't you, from a major medical facility usually?
Yeah.
Exactly. And then you've got the fact that when you're out in the desert, the sky is always big, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. It's beautiful.
Uh,
Yeah.
you see
So
the
vast. Yeah.
storms. Yeah, and you really connect with the weather and with the fact that you are quite small compared to this enormous universe around you. Do you feel that that really shifted your, outlook on nature as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I come from a very environment that is very volatile. I come from Iceland, and there's quite a lot of extremes in that environment. And again, you're you're used to dealing with different environments, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and different weather conditions. But I think there where I come from, we don't build any more in tune with nature the way that they were doing so radically in the desert. And I think that allowed you to kind of tune in to the rhythm of the land there. And yeah, if it wasn't, I wasn't there for long, but of course I would speak to locals and the people already living there. So if there were dry spells, I mean, everybody had to cut down on their water usage. And if there was a lot of rain, happy days, you could water everything, flush down the toilet as many times as you want. It's a bit of, again, you're more in sync with your environment. And I think the way, at least when I was studying architecture and really getting into it, I was realizing the way that we were teaching and really learning about architecture was really about keeping everything out and kind of isolating us. So I think there has been a lot more of kind of return to this closeness and this kind of systems understanding to our environment. But back when I was kind of studying architecture, it was a little bit pushed out. So yeah, going to the desert was a bit of an extreme environment, and I think it kind of shakes you up as well. It kind of gets rid of your notions of the materials and how we build and how we kind of perceive and interpret architecture around us.
So I'm seeing a close synergy between essentially the origins of your background and a number of the other pioneers, both that are here contemporary and those that preceded us, because often they were in a situation where they'd been completely, well, not oblivious to something, but not as attuned to something. And
Yeah.
then all of a sudden they're observing this and then thinking, well, we've got to modify what we do and sync it in and synchronize it, and realizing the complexity as well. One of the things that stands out about your work is the fact that there is an innate understanding that we are dealing with something that is a pretty messy problem. It's not simply a case that you can apply a certain word, you can write a manifesto and know this stuff. You've actually got to, as it were, get hands on. And your work also
Absolutely.
really dive into it, doesn't it? You really get involved. When did you start in your practice to really feel that, having seen, if you like, this bigger view of things and decided that you were going to shift into a fundamentally systems approach, when did you really start to feel that it was affecting the outcomes of your design decisions and actually the processes and methods behind that?
Yeah, I think, I mean, when I started working with specifically microorganisms, you and I think it was also kind of naivety of working with these kind of living systems and materials in general, is we're used to working with something that is innate, not living, doesn't necessarily have agency in the way it's worked with. And you, as a young designer, as a person exploring these things, approach them as you would any other material. And I think it's the kind of shock of it, of dealing with living systems, of not maybe understanding their environmental needs, and how very little kind of alterations in the way you behave or the way you treat or you're trying to work with that system really alters the material system that you're trying to create quite drastically. So you start to understand there is a lot more complexity in the way you deal with these systems and the way you work with them. And they have their own agency. They have their own tendencies and capacities of how much they can do. And I think as a designer, you also have to have an understanding of way you can approach these systems. So having a bit more of I guess I'm kind of structured the way I work with the system in a kind of a systematic approach, is that you identify the constraints and the boundaries that you can work within as a designer, or as a person that's engaged with the systems. Yeah, it's always complex, but it's wonderful and kind of surprising in this interactions as well. And I think there's opportunities that come up there. And as a person with an architect or design background, that's kind of opportunities that open up questions for further engagement, and also kind of an understanding the inherent kind of design agency that those systems have when you're forming or making materials or shapes or whatever you're working with.
Yeah. Now, of course, today is, as I've said, International Women's Day, and there are a lot of very formidable women in this arena. Now, I am aware that there have been certain individuals that I know that have influence, well, but basically they've played a role in your background, because obviously you've got a PhD, you've been through the formal process of learning. Of the women that have been involved in your development, which would you say have had the biggest influence on your thinking towards design and architecture?
I wouldn't necessarily say there is one specific individual. I've had the pleasure of working with quite a lot of women in my career, very strong, very inspirational women. I would say maybe somebody that really influenced me was probably when I was also starting out, a biologist in Barcelona, who I think it's often quite difficult in the different fields to really accommodate needs and wants and kind of desires in both the design field and the scientific field. But she's a biologist, a synthetic biologist that really took the time, and she still does this today, is to really understand the way designers work and think and adapt the way that we can work and approach these systems. And um, she was somebody that really supported me in the beginning and would sneak me into her lab after hours and really show me the ropes and help me do my little DIY, because back in the day when I started, of course, I didn't have any access to labs, which like a lot of other people that start in the field has. Um, Most of these things were done in my kitchen, so she would give me techniques and tools of how to work over my gas stove, how to work around that, how to boil things in my pot. So it became very kind of um, a very home DIY lab that she kind of helped me build. And I think like it's these little moments of that extra time and that extra attention that really I've appreciated alongside my journey and with the women that I've worked with, who are all amazing in their each ways. But there's nobody really one person, but it's bits and many different women that have inspired me. Yeah.
So many of us have started in the home. We created a home laboratory, and of course, when we look back through science, you contributed a wish to BIOfutures list, which was inspired by Boyle's list, and he was one of many, basically, gentlemen and gentle lady scientists that had a home laboratory. And I think it's a real testament to really how at the edge of innovation this field is, that so many within this community literally had to turn the kitchen into a laboratory because there weren't the facilities actually in the institutions at that time. Now, you did your PhD, but you still are very much integrated into academia. Tell me about that journey, and why there are various different paths that we can take, but what appealed to you about the specific path that you've taken?
I think it's been the opportunity to continue my line of questioning. I would say it started maybe really as a naive question of really how do we design with in bold with living systems with for me specifically microorganisms. And I think it was when I finished my master's. I did a master's in IAC in Barcelona, and that's where I got really into working with different living systems and got really introduced into that. And I remember finishing there and thinking, now what the hell do I do after this? I want to work with bacteria. I want to work with creating designs and systems that incorporate these living, smelling quite temperamental systems, and there was not really a direct architecture path to take. This was 10, 12 years ago. Um, so I had this opportunity to do a PhD to then really dive in and maybe focus on things specifically with biomineralization that I had not been able to accomplish through my to my master's. So coming to do a PhD really then gave me the proper environment. You know, you had an access to a lab, I had an access to a really amazing scientific team that taught me, I think, the ropes a little bit better. But what it gave me was really the space to investigate in a more formal manner. Um, how do you work with biomineralization? How do you design with biomineralization? Because when I explored that, mainly through my master's project, I came at this really naively. I wanted to just, yes, I'm going to work with these bacteria that precipitate crystals really rapidly. I'm kind of going to create these massive furniture. We're going to replace cement with these things, and it's going to be great. And it was like walking into a wall for 9 months because everything was failing. Nothing worked. You were getting tiny little crust of things. And I think it's there when I started to realize, okay, this is a little bit more complex in the way that we can't just work with this like we would wood or bricks or clay. Um, so I think that kind of set me up for my PhD is really then exploring, well, how do we engage with it, and what are the different aspects of engaging with living systems and designing with them. And I talk a lot about the idea of kind of sensing and getting a sensory kind of experience. And that's where kind of the DIY lab also comes in, is that when you're physically engaged with these systems, and I like to fail a lot. I think it's a good thing because um, it gives you a clearer picture of the agency and the kind of the boundaries of the system that you're working with. And yeah, I think I'm on a tangent here. So um, but I think, yeah, so being able to really understand and start to formalize this interaction that we're having, coming as a designer with these systems, academia and the PhD really allows me to have the support and to continue that on. And quite lucky that I'm in a group that's quite focused on living construction, the Hub for Biotechnology and Built Environment. And that's what we work on mainly.
Um, one of the things about nature is if we think back to sort of the evolution of natural history, obviously we had that time back in the classical period when it, the understanding of many creatures on the planet was by word of mouth, essentially, and sometimes very comical drawings that were sketched out based on what people had heard and how their imagination interpreted that. Then we moved into the era of iteration and of classification and much more technical information. Then we moved into another period when natural history became about collecting, getting specimens, going out, hunting them, killing them, stuffing them, sticking them in a collection that ended up maybe in a museum. And today we have transitioned to this era when we get to see things that we never even imagined could exist. We can literally look down and see bacteria in action and see cellular activity and watch the sort of the processes of nature. Pretty much, I mean, we're almost heading towards the quantum scale now. If we think back to the 20th century, I think many people romanticized nature in the way that they often had, and they projected onto it a lot of ideas that were somehow somewhat artificial, and they were very subjective, not objective in their reasoning. And if we think about sort of, people's responses when they were asked about nature, for example, when we look at data from studies and what have you, where people were interviewed about it, they'd often maybe name a big species, like, oh, my favorite creature is an elephant, which I know we might all be slightly inclined to name the macro species as our favorite organisms today. But as somebody that is working really intimately with the unseen, right at the edge, looking at things that many people are not even conscious of in the environment. What fascinates you most? And of the various organisms that you've worked with, which ones would you say are your favorites? What are your top three organisms to work with?
um, well, I would have to say my microorganism that is capable of biomineralisation, which is a soil bacteria, Sporosacchinopasterae, has to be one of my favorite. It's been my collaborator for 10, 11 years. So, um, slime molds is another thing. I think they're absolutely beautiful, and they fascinate me. For me, they invoke kind of a childish enthusiasm and watching them seeking out nutrients and kind of and moving around and kind of pulsating. And I really what I really like to work with as well is bioluminescent bacteria. For me, these are three really distinct, fantastic organisms and really wonderful to work with. What I love about being able to work in a university and work with these things is that we have tools and equipment to really look and explore these systems. And I think what is incredible is it being able to see, like with the slime molds, their actual kind of this pulsating rhythm when they are communicating and when they're transporting um, on an agar plate, for instance. And it's seeing something that you can't see in when you just have them on a Petri plate or when you have them in front of you. But being able to magnify this behavior is just beautiful to see and watch, and you have a different perspective than how you can work with it. And again, the kind of influences you're having on their environment and watching them maybe in time respond to you as well. Um, and there's always something about scanning electron microscope. I am a nerd when it comes to that. I love sitting in this big room with this massive, well, laser basically, that is focused on these tiny, tiny, tiny samples that really you can't really tell the difference between a rock and these samples, and being able to see the actual rod-shaped bacteria appear and calcify. And there was a moment when I was in my PhD, I was looking to understand how these bacteria form, how they actually crystallize, because we talk about it and you can't see it with your eyes. They don't have a macro architecture that forms specific structure. It's happening on such a micro scale, and it's crystals that are forming, and unless you're really able to magnify it up to the scale of a single microbe, you can't really see it. And what's really happening in this bacteria is that the bacteria are changing their kind of immediate kind of chemical environment. And the precipitation of calcium carbonate is happening on the cells. So we'll have these kind of balls kind of forming around it. As they grow and kind of expand like balloons, they start to basically enclose and entomb this bacteria. And then this crystal is formed. And it's a beautiful thing. It's incredibly kind of magical to see these formations and see these interactions happen, because you design this at such a macro scale that you're not able to really connect with what's happening. But through the tools and techniques that we have to be able to see this interaction really changes your perspective and really alters the way that you see. When I see these crystals forming, you can understand what's happening inside them and how long this is taking to form and things like that. That's, yeah. I have a very close personal relationship with all my organisms. I have very
I love it. Love it. I just, as you were speaking there, it struck me that I remember when I was a child, and architecture at that time was very much something with drawing boards and, lots of paper and pens, and perhaps the only sort of nature that you might see in a typical architectural practice of that era was maybe a potted plant. That was that was about it. And I was thinking about those that are working with the built environment through the lens of ecology and biology and the natural sciences and this new architectural practice. I was visioning something, the closest proxy I think I've actually seen. Well, it was a hybrid of university and sort of the wider world. It was a lab that was in Manchester back in the 20 teens. And it had a corporate partner, Siemens were a partner, and they had a few contraptions in there. They had like sort of some aquariums and one or two bits and pieces. But I'm picturing the emerging architectural practice being full of living organisms, very much like a laboratory. The architects, all of them working in synergy with other organisms, very experimental. The client coming in, whoever the client might be, and saying, well, we want this. And then the community of architects and the community of designers saying, well, we can't actually define precisely what the outcome will be aesthetically or certain technical details, because of course we're working in collaboration here. But we've taken your brief on, and we're going to work with whichever organisms we collaborate with to make it happen. Now, if that, and as you know, this is the year of wishes this year, because quite honestly, I think that this is a community we could really do with some extra help and funding and stuff going on. So I'm putting it out in the universe. Okay, world out there, this is what we would build if you actually gave us the funding. If we were to build this magical practice, wherever it might be, and you're one of the architects, one of the living architects, as it were, in the lab. What 5 bits of equipment would you think would be critical to this kind of operation? What could you not work without?
Incubators, autoclaves. mm, Microscopes. Bunsen burner. Glassware. I think you can do quite a lot with just those things.
Just
Quite a
so,
lot, actually.
and if budget was not an issue, and you could have anything at all, no matter what the price tag, what would that be?
Robots. How it kind of function, and so it's a car manufacturing facilities, but actually the robots either handling some of the lab work or actually injecting or monitoring or an in time kind of maintaining and caring about these systems, because I think that's one of the biggest things that we struggle, and I work with companies now also trying to implement some of these technologies into products. And the problem is not only creating these materials, but it's also the maintenance and the kind of the aftercare and the longevity of these materials, which necessarily aren't as intended for 200 years. They might be intended for 10 years, 5 years. So it's that also kind of the need for care, both in the making of the objects or the materials, but also in afterwards. So robots would be great to
Robots that they are connected to both AI and the living organisms. They interpret the signals. They know when the plant or whatever it is thirsty. And yeah, this is connecting with Chris Bellamy's talk last week. He was talking about the contraption that he had to build
yeah.
time for the Iris van Herpen dress. It was
Exactly.
this living dress inside. Yeah, it's
But
art.
that's the thing. I mean, it's we when we're creating materials, we also have to think about the bioreactor. So much of what I do is not only creating the physical materials themselves, but also very bespoke bioreactors in whatever system or situation we're creating for. So actually, a lot of my time goes into that, optimizing their environment, optimizing that process that is needed to fabricate or to synthesize that very specific response. So yes, it's a whole system of interactions that you're engaged in when working with them.
being a bit of a nerd helps, because then you can suss out how to use the technical equipment and what have you. I also think something that is quite common among this community is thinking about new working environments. So, some people are working, although they do design and architecture, they're working in a laboratory. And sometimes that is in a university or that is in some sort of permanent structure. My work often involves basically taking the lab with me, because much of what I do is out in the environment. So I've been thinking a lot about how small can I make the lab? What can
Mhm.
I in the ruck if I've got to go somewhere that's off road? Or really, my dream facility is I want Airstream to call me up. I want them to get on the phone to me and say, we're going to build you a bespoke lab with everything to take around the world.
Seriously.
Because then I to go like you, I'm guessing. When we look at the leaders in this field, we're all over the world, aren't we? We're everywhere. We're on all the continents, and we're not even in one place at one time. And so actually collaborating, it's so key to this domain, isn't it? It's bringing in all those different skills. And also, and this is, I'm coming to another thing now, as you were mentioning with your PhD, when you were looking to find what was out there, when you were looking at, well, what path might I take? Something I think really all of us have experienced is that question of, well, the traditional pathways do not accommodate for careers like ours. So we've got to do something a bit different here. And that has, for many, many people, particularly women, involved a lot of sacrifice. It's involved making some very difficult decisions because of the fact that we don't have everything that we need in place. So the choice is simple. Either you adapt your life to compensate for the gaps, or you just don't do this stuff. What for you have been the biggest challenges, the hardest choices to make to get where you are right now?
I think location, being able to actually find a group that is in sync with the way you're thinking and in sync with having infrastructure to support what you're doing, and getting funding to do what you're doing. That's quite a big part of it. Um, no, but it's always a kind of a scary idea that you specifically in academia as well, you're not necessarily stable and suited for just one environment. You might need to pick up and move quite quickly, and just moving from one institute to another, it can be quite a bit of difference because, like I said, what we're doing is sitting quite in the middle of spaces, and even me being in this space for quite a while, I still feel like me and people like me don't necessarily fit into institutional structure. We're always in the wrong faculty, or we're in the wrong building, or our needs are just not being able to be met in one space, and we have to distribute our my workshop, my office, my lab in all different buildings. So it makes your workflow also quite difficult. And I think in institute that have more traditional kind of mindset to science and or to architecture also struggle to understand what you're doing. When I'm bringing in 3D printers or even cooking equipment into the lab, I often get raised eyebrows or panicked, kind of, "Oh, we need to check health and safety on this. What are you doing? What is that?" So it's really it's really you kind of have to adapt everybody around you to understand what you're doing and to feed into that structure, and it takes a lot of time. It requires a lot of collaboration, like you were saying before, but collaboration is very, individual based, and you have to kind of hope that you can convince as many people around you to work in your mad world and see that, oh, this is maybe something beneficial not only for design or architecture, but it would have implication also to the scientific field, and hopefully get grants out of it so we can advance some of these things properly.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, what you're saying is very much resonating, I think, with what both Piers and I have thought, I've noticed that you do often have to up sticks, you have to move around a lot.
Yeah.
Because you can't do this work unless you do that, not only in terms of field trips, but you've got to be prepared to move if the opportunity comes up. And I know certainly the UK has lost a lot of its female leaders in this field, in particular the last 7 years, because what was needed for them was not in the UK. It wasn't there. Newcastle, I think, has got a really good setup, as obviously, Central St Martin's also in UCL. And the other thing is this sort of, I guess you could say, the fact that there is this digital network. I mean, we are connected digitally, and in many ways, I don't know how you feel about this, but I feel that without the internet, without the emergence of digital technologies, we could not be doing this right now, not just this conversation, but we could not be working in this way because we rely on this to get all of the information we need from these different places across the different subject fields.
Absolutely. That became very apparent, I would say, during COVID as well. Um, I, I actually love the fact that, I mean, Newcastle is a great place to live, but it is very, was it disconnected from maybe larger hubs that have a lot more happening and going on, workshop and places like that. Um, but I think it was during COVID where it became really apparent that we could open up a lot of these spaces and a lot of these conversations and have a lot of things online to work, to communicate. So I think for the couple of years after, well, 2020 to 2022, um, a lot of the projects I was actually doing were virtually, and a lot of my collaborators were virtual as well. So we hadn't seen each other, but been working together for a couple of years. And it's the idea of being able to then share, of course, information and share our techniques of working. But I think it also became apparent that it's important to well, for starting out, it was a lot of DIY. Like, I feel like the biodesign community and kind of working with living system was really based on DIY practices and approach, and about some crazy people trying to work out things in their bathtub or in their kitchen and things like that, and then kind of sending it out in forms of um, sheets of how to work with kombucha, for instance, and recipes and stuff like that. Um, and I think it became quite apparent that actually a lot of the things that we're doing need to be made a bit more simple, I think, than how we're working with them in a lot of universities and institutes. Because I think as soon as you put the power in people's hands of being able to have just a few equipment at home, being able to have a one-on-one conversation, maybe like this, about some recipes or techniques or whatever, and then being able to experience and work with it themselves is really beneficial. And it takes the kind of dependency on these bigger institute and these bigger um, financial needs as well, of just being able to be a bit more craft based and further a lot the field as well, like that, because the more people get hands on, the more people are actually understanding the work and the processes that we're working with, and yeah, I could go a bit further.
I mean, one of the things that struck me the other day, I was thinking about the fact we've seen the political situation around the world. We've gone from a position very much in the early 20 teens. It felt like the world was getting smaller. I know in my own practice, I was around the world a lot. I was going off, Asia, the Americas, Europe, what have you. And now we're in a situation where we've gone from this coming together to fragmentation. When I look at the world map, there are many places that I would have been traveling to, working on various projects just 10 years ago that I just couldn't now. I just couldn't go there. And we've also seen a situation where things have become much more precarious. We don't know what's around the corner. And so in some ways, the fact that we've essentially as a community not just had to pioneer the materials that we're creating, well, co-pioneer with our collaborators, and concepts and the sort of systems, we've actually had to be very pioneering in terms of financing, in terms of the logistics, the operations. We've had to become very resilient. when you were talking about the fact that you have to go, Newcastle is great, but you are, as you say, quite disconnected. And I'm aware you've come from a country, so your family and your old friends and what have you will be elsewhere. When you're an academic, you've got to be very resilient personally, because you've got to be able to go from one place to another and just try and, fit it in. And also, but actually, the learning in what we've been doing, it does apply at the societal level. And I think what you were saying about, doing these DIY labs and downscaling it, that's so important, because this makes it scalable in various times, doesn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think it also scaling things down and making them a bit more approachable also means, I think, that they become more applicable when we talk about creating new materials. So if we're creating materials that can only be, they're super sensitive, that everything needs to be sterile, you can't breathe on them, like they are so protective, then they're not going to go that far. So if we're able to work with systems that are more resilient, we're able to understand how to work with them in an easier manner, then I think the route to scaling up and to applying them into our built environment is a lot more straightforward. It does require some adjustment. It's not a perfect, it will never be a perfect thing, but I think it just opens it up a little bit more and, yeah, makes it a little bit more adaptable to what we need.
Brilliant. So we're now into the last quarter of our chat. And now, well, first of all, you've done so many brilliant projects that we just haven't got the bandwidth, even in a whole hour, to talk about them all. But what I work is, there is always, they feel very tangible to me. They are, you're building things that do feel like you could have them, in your studio or in your home, or and they're almost like something out of Doctor Who. There's clearly, clearly they're solving a problem. Um, Share with us some insights on just one of your projects, the one that you feel for you has been the most significant.
I think it would have to be one that I probably spent the most years on, which would be through my PhD. It's not necessarily one project, but I think it's a process, and kind of a process that opened my mind to think about these systems in a little bit of a different manner. Um, so working with a bacteria that I've been working with in biomineralisation, as I said before, there's no inherent architecture. There's no inherent forms that they create other than on a very, very micro scale. So the way that I started approaching them was putting them into basically a mold that was a box. So I wanted to create a box that was biomineralized. And to some extent, that was quite successful in creating. I had to create a very complex kind of bioreactor, have a mold that was filled with sand and bacteria, tubing that would then pump in these nutrients and oxygen to facilitate this emergence of the biomineral matter. And once you've done that for X amount of time, you don't really see what's happening. It's all very invisible. You don't really see the mineralization forming. You might see some white crust forming. But it isn't until you take it apart and you open the mold and you see and get the object that you see if it worked or not. Where it was really interesting actually was where it was failing a lot, where the mineralization wasn't conforming to this box or cube shape that I was trying to conform it to. It was these partial mineralization patterns, and I started acting like archaeologist basically. So I would get my little brush and a little kind of a shovel thing and very delicately try to take off whatever friable material was to try to unveil this kind of hidden hierarchy of flow and reaction that just isn't visible when it's all closed up in a box. And what was occurring was, of course, these bacteria, like I was explaining before, they create these crystals that expand and connect and form these hard surfaces. And of course, what it's doing as well at the same time is then blocking any other liquid or oxygen to permeate, because technically you're creating a stone. So what it was forming on the inside were these flow channels, that would then rupture due to the pressure of pumping in liquid into the system. They would create new float, and it would become a very complex chaos, kind of turbulence that had been going on while I was just looking at a clear box, thinking, okay, it's going to turn into this solidified cube. It's going to be beautiful, and that made me think that we can't just look at the exterior of these processes, exterior of these making processes. There is so much that goes into the it's kind of going into the mold of this practice. It's very based on Simon Don and Tim Ingold about what's happening within these molds and these processes and everything that comes into that helps this object or this process come into being. That really then, I think, changed the way I observe and the way I approach other living systems, is that you have to really look at it bottom up and inside out before you start looking at the larger picture. And also when you're scaling up and when you're trying to create something bigger with these processes, everything changes, everything morphs, everything reacts differently. So that's still my favorite project, mainly because it was also kind of based on failure. It wasn't what I was trying to do. It wasn't really what I was trying to create, and it kind of skewed my idea of the control that I have, and where the control in working with these systems really lie. And we have limited control. Do have control, but we have limited control. But we have more control in the boundaries that we're setting for these systems. So I did have control over this cube form and the influxes of media, and it's how we choreograph, how we modulate these kind of control parameters and boundaries that I think is a very interesting thing. And it also relates very directly back into architecture and about the systems and like the buildings. We're creating systems, so it's just creating architecture for me at a different scale for a different client, but it still very much links from the microbe in the forming of these objects to a big building and how everything comes together.
Now, as you were talking about that, I was thinking about cooking, and I think cooking is a good analogy. And I was picturing a crit. So I'm picturing let's say you've got a whole class of master students, and they've all been using the Thora method to create their architectural models. It'd be more like Bake Off, wouldn't it? It would be more like Bake Off than your classical. Because you'd be slicing into the architecture, you'd be having a little look, you'd be just checking, did the ingredients form in the right way? Did you need to cook it a little bit more? Just marvelous. It's a shame that we can't eat the architectures.
I don't think it would. I don't think it would want to.
You
The smell is just awful. So the byproduct of this process, unfortunately, is ammonia. So you can imagine how these things smell like. I wouldn't recommend eating it, but it's very akin to cooking. I think if you're good in the kitchen, if you're good at baking, you would also be really good in working with living systems for materials. And I think the link is very close together. It's essentially you are following a recipe. Then you can get a little creative sometimes in the way you can observe how the bread is rising or falling, or you just, it's this kind of innate sense that you start to have with the material that you're working with. So I think it's very very similar to baking.
we need to have a global baking competition among the community. Test your theory.
I think it's a great idea for a class, actually.
Oh dear. Now, I asked everyone who's been in this series about their thoughts about the future, but since you're an architect, I was thinking the scenario is this. It's 20 years from now, and all of the sort of technical glitches that you're dealing with You've been through that. You've had lots of failures, but the fabulous thing is you've learnt a huge amount about working with living materials and building with them. What does, I'm going to give you a design brief. I'm your client and I want you to design me a building that is going to, it's going to be situated, we'll go back to the desert, we'll go back to there. It's situated in the desert and it's a living building. What does it look like and what are its virtues?
It looks like something crazy. Like it doesn't. What does it look like? It, it follows its environmental constraint. That's what it is. So if the building is being built while it's living, it follows the environment, the season that it was built in. It follows the activity of the microorganisms in those spots. So it will look, I think, maybe a little bit scary. So look like something, but there'll be a beauty in it. But I think aesthetics as we would like it in straight lines, glossy, shiny surfaces, I don't think that is something that will be favorable for us. Um, it will look weird and gooey, smelly. Um,
Do you think we can engineer the microbes and so then produce a nicer smell? Do you think that might be?
oh yes, that's already happening in my lab. So that will definitely be something.
Does your tell you I'd like it to smell, I don't know, like roses or something?
Oh yes, yes,
I breathe.
yes. Absolutely, absolutely. That can be a pre-formation with these materials where it's all a bit. I mean, just like when we're building our houses now, they do smell often a little bit chemical after they've just been built. So there might be a resemblance to that where it smells a bit like you've entered a brewery staples, some sort of a smell and that kind of range. And then once you start to move in, actually the flora would also change because it will take the flora and the microbes that you have on your body and into the building. So the building will also change and more. Um, now I don't know if it's a completely positive thing that everything is alive and made. I think there needs to be a combination of
Mm.
inert materials and living materials. But I definitely think in the next 10 to 20 years, there will be a bit more of a presence of partially bio created living materials. I don't know if there'll be a total switch, but
Yeah, I'm thinking of Richard Beckett's work and,
yes, I'm
you
thinking that's all.
because did you, I'm thinking, I'm sure I said,
We worked on an exhibition in London Design Biennale last summer, and I know Richard quite well. Yeah.
and I'm thinking of, people might in this sort of period spruce up their interiors by painting the walls a different color. I'm thinking on the work that you did with Richard, painting the wall with microbes for a different health impact or maybe even moods, sort of something that physically interacts with you, but a sort of that you do every so often.
Yeah, no, I think it's the work that he does is quite incredible, and I think it's so needed today as well. And I think especially in the more context of, again, I'm going to bring up COVID, but that then there was a little bit more of a public realization of the microbes and the viruses and everything we have around us and how it really impacts us. And I think being able to create surfaces and textures for your home, which I mean, it's almost kind of there now, but to support the good microbes, the good environment, and also create a healthier living situation is something that I'm incredibly excited about, and I think that's one of the things that actually would be something that is we would see in our buildings, would see in our houses in the near future. I think that's good.
There could be a market there. If we look at the size of the health market, label anything anti-aging, and good for your life and microbiome, then yeah, you're a winner. Maybe we need to change the funding angle here a bit. We need to be pitching different communities. So I'm just broadening it out, thinking about beyond this particular property, my dream home that you've built for me in the desert. To all of society, even accommodating for some of the big challenges that we've got right now, what do you think might be realistic by mid-century, by 2050, in terms of the advancements?
Oh, I think I got cut off for a second. Only got part of that.
So just the final question, Thora. By the middle of the century, even accounting for the sort of stochasticity that we've got in the world right now, what do you think could be realistic in terms of advancements in this field by mid-century?
For our built environment. Um, yeah, no, like we've been talking about, interior products, really. I think nothing structural as of yet, but a lot of more environmentally friendly interior products that have been done with less chemicals or biologically produced chemicals alternative. I think, yeah, in terms of panels, I mean, I'm also working on that specifically on fiber boards that will be quite close to ready to market in the next few years. But I think a lot of interior products, we could see them being created through living processes. I think we're long off still of creating structural materials, but that's only if you're thinking about microbes. I mean, I've seen the work of what's it called, Botanic in Germany, I think. Yeah, Germany. Um, where they're controlling or mediating trees to grow in a certain way to literally grow a building. So I think that's quite exciting, and I would look into seeing if I could grow my building if it was just the first floor by controlling and kind of um, modifying the directionality that they take when they're growing and forming. So I think that's quite interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, Ferdinand over in Munich, I think. He's been doing work on that. Germany is quite associated with basically curating trees, horticulture
Yeah.
to get them to grow in certain directions. Yeah, I think is I'd agree with you on that. I think that's very realistic and augmenting. Obviously, most of the built environment for 2050 is already built, so augmentations for building are a series of products that can be integrated into existing building systems. Well,
Yeah.
we have time. It's been a brilliant conversation. My only regret is we haven't got longer.
That's been really nice.
Yeah, we could talk all day. We will have to have another chat at some future point. But just to say, real pleasure to have you today. Love your work and so many things I had on my list to talk to you about. But I think we packed quite a lot in, didn't we?
I think so. Covered a lot.
Yeah, covered a lot. Well, you have a wonderful International Women's Day and
Thanks.
with all of the projects that you are working on.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.